At this time, we're back. We're diving into more talent and recruitment world goodness with a very experienced talent recruiter today. Arturo Natella is here. Arturo, you started a company. Was there a moment in your talent world where you're like, I can't keep doing it the way I've been doing it, or people think they should be doing it, and it led you to start something on your own?
Yeah, actually, I come from a multilingual, multicultural home. I would say my family taught me how to get a job, but didn't really teach me how to navigate a career. And so, for me, for some reason, I'm wired in such a way that I've always wanted to help people. It's really been my motivating factor. So I started out working in government, and in working in government, I was doing a lot of what's called I call needs-based employment, which means I was jumping around from job to job. And at some point, I ended up doing a lot of work in workforce development. I spent about 4 years doing that. And that's where I learned everything I need to learn about just how someone gets a job and keeps a job. And from there, I kind of bounced around a little bit more, trying to get my footing now that know what I know or knew what I knew. And I started reaching out to people in my community and I said, hey, like, I need help. I want to transfer from government into the for profit space. And what I found was it was very difficult because people's advice was not helpful. And sometimes by design, sometimes just by not understanding how someone else's experiences could differ in looking for work. I remember someone telling me, you gotta just put yes, short summary at the top, and that's gonna help you translate your experiences into a corporate job. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So I was like, what? And so, at some point, just going through the process, going through the interviews, just experiencing some just brutal experiences that most everyone has experienced in their career, plus not understanding how to do this stuff, I said, all right, this is not working. This is a broken system. So I just started to compile a list of jobs and sharing it with everyone and saying, hey, here are opportunities. I'm going to break down the opportunity silo here. And then I created a methodology so that the jobs that I was sharing aligned with a methodology of what constitutes wealth and wealth building job opportunity. And then from there, I just became obsessed with how to hire and how to get hired. And I've been obsessing about recruiting ever since. And so the thing I tell people is I can recruit in competency based, skill based, performance based. And if you want, we can even do, an unstructured interview and I could tick off a fourth one. And I know all of those, I can do them. And then I reverse engineer all of that to help people by also coaching them how to navigate those processes.
Yeah, so I feel like you're talking about outcome-based hiring a lot. When you think about folks who are listening to this who are in the town space, and maybe their approach is, well, you post the job, you kind of hope for the best, and that's my outcome is if it works or not. What kind of ways are you trying to get people to have better habits, or what kind of ways are you trying to get people to focus more on outcomes that you feel like would get to you what folks are actually trying to look for?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. So I was talking to a HR director at an institution, and they were piloting creating job descriptions based on outcomes or performance.
Mm.
And we had two managers. So these two managers were the beta testers, and I sat with each of them for an hour, and I just said, okay, what does this person need to do? So the first manager, they found it very helpful, and they're like, you know what? Actually, there's some things that I realize here that I didn't really think about, and I need to think about things differently. And they put out their job description. The other manager had to go back and rescope the role because the role that they had created was not well thought out. They didn't fully understand what was required. So there's the first part, is that sometimes job descriptions are copy and paste and they're put out there and people don't really understand what's required. The second piece of it is when you think about outcomes and what's required and what the person has to perform, the person actually understands what they're going to be doing, and that can be a motivating thing. And a lot of times what people don't realize when they put out job descriptions is that a lot of companies are putting out generic job descriptions and they're trying to be everything to everybody. You can't do that. Be who you are, be what this job needs to be. And then in that performance, sprinkle in some things like environment, the culture of the organization, the managerial style of the person overseeing that person, and then you get a complete picture of what's required. And then when you apply for that job, you're like, that actually makes sense to me.
Hmm.
And just a quick example, I have a friend who he's self-proclaimed worker bee. He says, don't ask me to think about what's 6 steps, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps ahead. Tell me what's in front of me and I'll do it. I'm a worker bee. I have another friend who says, I just want to create the strategy. Don't tell me what to do. I know how to do it. Just tell me what the outcomes are. If you have a mixed match of those different types of personalities or those types of needs, and you have a job description that's everything to everyone, and you're not articulating what the environment's going to be like managerial style with those performance objectives, you're not going to get a good hire. You're just not. And so to me, it's wild that talent is not incorporating these types of thoughts or strategies in their job description creation.
So then downstream in an interview process, if somebody nails the front end, like you just described, has a clear job success card and everything is rocking there, how does that translate into what happens later in processes that work a lot better than just kind of an amorphous cut and paste job description?
So I'll tell you right now, if I said you tell me your greatest strength, like that's a crazy question. To what? Because a lot of times tell me your greatest strength is to a target that may not exist or is only in the head of the interviewer.
Mm-hmm.
And so a person can be telling their greatest strength as it relates to one, maybe two, maybe three pieces of the job description, or maybe it's related to something in the job description, but it's a low priority for you.
Mm.
But for them, they're thinking like I'm hitting the target. So when you're talking about downstream, now you have someone who's giving you an example about their greatest strength, their most significant accomplishment to something that's not important to you. Because you have a generic or general job description, that person's a weak candidate now. Even though for them, if they knew what was required of the role, they would have given you a most significant accomplishment or greatest accomplishment related to what's actually important to you,
It's actually relevant to the role.
relevant to the role. And then you get asked these other questions that are just crazy to me, like, are you smarter? Do you work hard? Where do you plan to be in the next 5 to 10 years? That's not, these are questions that are not based on performance. These are questions like, how do I feel? Which is great, but at the end of the day, it doesn't tell me how the person's actually going to perform in this role. And then I also get people who do what's now I'm hearing like job tests, or they're naming it various different things, but someone said that they'll fly someone out to be in the job for a week to see what they're like on the job, which is crazy proposition to me because that's a part to whole fallacy. Because if you're saying like this person works well in the week and they vibe with the team within that week, then they must vibe the entire time they're there. And that's a crazy proposition, especially if you're neurospicy. Because if you're neurospicy and you get really excited being in the role and you're there for that 1 week, you're going to operate 100%. But the moment you understand what the role is, you're going to check out and you're like, all right, I figured it out. I'm actually going to operate now at 50%. And that, I mean, the other people, you don't have to be neurospicy for that to happen, but other people as well could have that. So all to say, like, know what you need, talk about it, be explicit about it, interview for that, and then you're going to go on well.
Some other parts of the interview process, what is your take these days on reference checking, valuable or not?
So I actually think reference checking is valuable. What I find in the reference check process that's dangerous, and I say dangerous intentionally, is this phenomenon that I see people doing what I call a community background check. I actually see this a lot in the nonprofit space, and I get frustrated with it. What they'll do is they'll say, okay, you're connected to these people from these different jobs. They're not in your reference list, but I'm going to reach out to them anyway without you knowing. Why that's problematic? Yeah, and that's super problematic because you don't ultimately know the context in which that person vibed or didn't vibe with them. So I'll give you an example. I worked for a boss who said to me, I need you to do this task. And I said, this doesn't feel right. And the person said, no, you need to do it. I was like, okay, I'll do it. They must be right. I did the thing, and then I got in trouble with their boss's boss. And their boss's boss said, put me aside and said, what happened? Why'd you do that? And I said, well, my boss told me to do it. And they said, well, just so you know, your boss telling everybody else that you were the one that did that, not him. And so now what happens is if I didn't had that meeting and someone was to do that community background check, I would have had a big problem. Right. And so so you don't really get a full picture when you're doing this. And so for me, if you don't have confidence in your recruiting process, so much so that you do this community background check, do a gut check to figure out why you don't have confidence in your process to begin with. And then you're going to remove these false positives or negatives, and you could end up getting yourself a phenomenal candidate and not ruin someone's career because you got the one person who had a chip on their shoulder for whatever reason the person did.
Do you see any value in the person's direct manager being the only reference? Is the relationship key, or do you run into the same problems even if that's the targeted reference that you're going for?
So for references, look, what I'd want to see is someone you've managed, someone you've worked with, someone who's managed you. Now, sometimes you're not going to have that. So you might have someone who's managed you, someone you've worked with. It depends on where you are in your career and where you want to be. If I see that the person doesn't have any managers, but they only see people that have worked with them, that's a concern. One of the key factors that a good recruiter is going to be looking for is what type of managers have you had? What type of managers have you worked well with? Haven't you worked well with? What about your teams? If you can't answer those two factors among 3 different jobs that you've had, there's a problem there. And sometimes it may be you. Sometimes you have bad luck, but sometimes it might be you. So we got to figure out what's going on. So for references, just know that you want to make sure that you leave at least with a reference from your boss. Sometimes you can't, then you got to at least have some folks that you've worked with. But over time, you need to start having those managers to be your references.
We've been talking in terms of our audience is talent recruiters, but if our audience was job seekers, what is one piece of advice or something you wish people who are candidates heard from you about landing roles that give them a real shot at building more wealth or upward mobility in their career? What kind of things would you want them to think about?
So a few things. First is you want to be working for name brand employers. And I mean that like well-known companies, either in your town, your city, your state, or nationally. So that could be anywhere from, Google to here in Boston, there's an amazing marketing company called Think Argus. Very well known in Boston, not known nationally, right? But they're both name brand companies. And there's a heuristic there because if you work in those name brands, then you can operate at a name brand level. So you can operate at that high level capacity. Working for startups is an amazing place to be because you can then fill any skill gaps that you may not have or you may have because you have to be everything to everyone in those startup spaces. And then you can also specialize too. And then also look for jobs where you can network with other people or you will have professional development, either sponsored from the employer or they will connect you to resources where you can get that professional development. Usually when you see those types of things, that usually gives you an indication that that's going to provide you on a pathway up and you can end up just climbing you can end up rising in your career trajectory based on those supports and those factors.
Last thing, if companies or other recruiters want to work with you, how should they get connected or what should they look for?
LinkedIn. You can reach out. You can find me at Arthur or Arturo Natella, or you can go to goamaru.com. Happy to be a resource to everyone.
Nice. And we'll put all that in the info description. Arturo, thanks for coming on. Thanks everyone for listening. Make sure to catch all episodes, all the places you get your podcasts. And you can, of course, catch us in stunning 4K on YouTube. Thanks for listening. Until next time, catch you soon.